Hey, welcome back. That was a program that I had written in 2004 and I had called it Bugs Life. Now, I called it Bugs Life because in 2004 there was a Pixar movie of the same name that was released. Anyways, that program was basically designed to simulate ants and an ant system. And if you watched it closely, you could very clearly see that it's a little bit rough around the edges. So I want to make it better. I will not be able to complete it in a week, or I will not be able to complete it today. This might take several weeks and several episodes. So why don't you come in on this journey with us? And the best way to do that is to essentially hit that subscribe button. So go ahead, join us, and let's see how this turns out. Thank you.
Hey RK.
Hey buddy, I was waiting for you to actually start the program.
Are we all ants today?
We are all ants today. So I already showed you that Bugs Life that I did, right? A long time. Did you actually see that?
No, not I don't remember.
Oh, okay. Do you want to see that?
Sure. Yeah, why not?
All right. So you know what? Let me
It's a Bug's Life.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's called Bugs Life, and
The Bug's
essentially,
Life.
this was written in 2004. So if it's a little bit rough around the edges, I fully expect you to forgive me. Essentially, this is all. It's an ant system.
Oh.
An ant system has a nest over here. It also has a food source.
Okay.
And you also have ants that basically do the job of looking for food. Once an ant finds food, it needs to go back to the nest carrying that food particle and then strengthening the nest.
Oh.
Once the nest becomes a certain, reaches a certain threshold, it can create new ants, or at least that's what the idea was.
Oh.
It's not perfect,
Right.
and it needs a lot of work. So I thought this would be like the best opportunity to completely rewrite. Oh, there you go. It's hung right now.
Oh.
That's because I'm using a lot of vector math and. I'm using a lot of vector collections and things like that, which are not really conducive for asynchronous programming. I also made the mistake of making every ant its own thread. So it had
that could be the main issue.
That's also a mistake. I realize that now. Instead of making it a whole its own system and everything. So I sort of wanted to redesign the entire ant system and sort of start working on that again. And I think, like I explained in the introduction, we will not be able to do this in a week. I don't want to make our episodes 1.5 hours long. It really messes with our viewer retention. Anyways, that being said, I only want to sort of design what each one of the components of an ant system will look like.
Sure.
All right. I don't want to do anything more than that. So an ant system, essentially what I'm showing over here, basically consists of an ant world, more or less a canvas, on which ants will be drawn. Then we'll have the ants themselves, which we'll be sort of designing today, just to sort of define what an ant will look like. And then an ant nest, all right. And then a food source that can appear randomly on the screen. I also want to make this food source sort of, it can be depleted.
Sure.
And I think a lot of ant simulations out there, once a food source appears, it just stays over there. It doesn't go away. It's like an infinite food supply. I don't want it to be like that. A food source can disappear and then sort of appear somewhere else. I want it to be like that. And then you would, of course, have a new concept, at least as far as this ant system is concerned, because the one that I just showed, it did not have this pheromone trail. So essentially, when an ant finds food, it starts laying down pheromones and it sort of traces its way back to the nest. That's what its job is. Along the way, it will like sort of laying down, it'll lay down pheromones. When another ant comes across a pheromone, it will basically go to wherever the food is, or wherever the pheromone strength is like the highest, so that it knows that the food source is that way. And the hope is that you will be able to see the trails of all of these pheromones. It should look very biological, very tree-like in structure, or at least as far as its spreading is concerned. If there are multiple food sources, and all of these ants finding food and everything. it should look like that. But for today, I just want to sort of design the ant world. Just design just the ant and what its nest look like. None of the animations or anything like that. Sounds good?
Yep.
All right, let's get coding, man.
Oh, okay.
All right, let's start with the HTML file. I have a skeleton of a HTML file already created. I'm going to give it a title called ant system. On the canvas, let's set it to about 1200 by 1000 pixels wide. You can see that I'm calling this canvas a canvas. I'm also going to create the file called ant.js, and these would be its global variables. It would need the context. We need to store the width and the height of the canvas as well. These are of course global variables. Let's start by writing a function called init, in which we will first initialize the canvas by getting it from the HTML document. And once we have it from the HTML document, let's create the context out of it. The context we are using here, of course, is two-dimensional graphics or the two-dimensional context. And once we have the context, we can also store the width and the height of the canvas separately into variables. All right, now that I have the init function, let's call the init function from the onload of the body. All right, so that we know that it will be loaded when we refresh the screen. All right, let's refresh the screen, and you can see that there is a skeleton of the canvas being created. I'm going to change the height to 800 so that it fits within the screen. So you can barely see it, but the canvas is still there. We'll make it a little bit more visible right now. Let's create a new function where we'll basically draw the ant system. And let's start by drawing the ant system as black in color. To do that, I'm going to use the context.fill style, which will be, of course, black. I'm going to call the begin path and then the rect function to basically paint the context black. All right. With that being said, let's see what that looks like. And of course, that didn't work because we didn't call the ant system function from within the init. And once we do that, you can see that it still didn't work because I didn't include the script parameter, which included the ant.js. All right. So once I've done that, hopefully now it should work. There you go. All right. Let's start by creating the ant class. This would basically define what our ant looks like. Let's start with writing down some comments, which basically describes what this class does. All right, with that being done, let's start defining our class and defining our constructor. Now the constructor in this case would take just one parameter for now, and we're going to call it type. Now I did want to start with other parameters, but then I thought they were not necessary, or we can define them at a later point in time. Now what this type defines, we will define it at a later point in time. All right, with that being done, an ant should have a size. I'm just going to arbitrarily call it 10 or define it as 10. It should also have a position. Now the position, to maintain the position, X and Y position, I'm going to use the point class. And the ant should also have a speed. And arbitrarily, I'm just defining it as 3,3. All right. Let's also create a function here called render, which basically renders the ant on the screen itself. And the render would of course take a context. All right. So let's start defining what the ant system will look like. All right. So this is what the ant in the image looks like, but of course it will be very unfeasible for us to draw an ant exactly like this. So we're going to make the ant as simple as possible by giving it a head and by giving it this large body. All right. So with that being said, let's just draw the head first. All right. So the head should be drawn at this position. I'm just going to rename this variable here as POS because position was very verbose. All right. And we'll just leave a comment about that because it will make it more simplistic. All right. So I've already started filling out or drawing out the ant. I'm going to give a fill style of that yellow color that you saw on the presentation. So drawing the head is actually pretty simple. All I'm going to use is the arc function that essentially, uses the method definition to draw an arc. So once I have that nailed down, All right, let's just use the fill method and then just see what it looks like. I mean, at this point, yeah, so we also need to go back to the ants.js, basically our main JS file, and define an array of ants. For now, there would just be one ant so that we can see on the screen what the ant is going to look like. So I'm going to declare an array. I'm going to declare just one single ant for now. I'm going to pass the parameter as 0, which is the type parameter. I mean, right now I'll just put it as 0. Then I'm going to push it into the array. And all of these arrays, I'm going to essentially draw them on the screen using the for each method of the array. So once I have that, I can just say ant.render of, and I'll just pass the context. And once I have that, I should see just a single ant head on the screen. So take a look at all of these ants that I have put on the presentation. All of these ants have different directions on them. Essentially what should happen is that the body of the ant should follow the head of the ant. So the body of the ant should be behind the head of the ant at all points in time. So we need to do that. So to do that, we would need something called as an angle. We need to determine the angle at which the ant is traveling. And to do that, I'm going to open our common API, the codespace API.js, and I'm going to start defining this function called getAngle. Essentially, this function will return the angle between 2 points. Let's start by first defining what the function does. All right. So it gets the angle in radians between any given 2 points. All right. So to do that, what you need to do is get the x difference and the y difference, and then just use the maths.atan2 function to return the angle in radians. That's about it. So once you have the radians, you can use the we are using the maths.atan2 function to return the radians. So once we have that, let's just return that. Now let's use this function in our ant.js to essentially render the body of the ant. To do that, I'm going to say, let's use the getAngle function, which would be this.position.x, this.position.y, the next position of the ant, which is the position.x plus speed.x. All right, so that basically defines where the next position of this ant is. So that gives us an angle in radians as to where the body should be. And then we can just use trigonometry to define where the body should be. So this should be, I'm just going to call it body x. Let's just say this dot size into 1.2, and I'm using this 1.2 over here because the body of the ant is bigger than the head of the ant. That's what it signifies over here. All right, and we use the cos and the sine function to determine where the body should be behind the head of the body. And once again, we use the arc function to just essentially draw the body of the ant. All right. So just to summarize, what we are doing is just getting the angle in which the ant is traveling, and we are drawing the body just essentially behind the ant. That's what is happening over here. And now as I'm typing over here, I'm creating a lot of errors. This isn't perfect, but bear with me while I correct this. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do over here is just define this variable called body size so that I don't have to perform this calculation over and over again. So I'm just replacing this variable called body size by that 1.2, and you can see that it's drawn, but I can't see anything on the screen. That's because I've forgotten to give the fill function at the very end. So I can just say, just write that out. And once again, when I refresh, I still don't see the body because I'm using this constant dot half pi instead of 2 pi. And once I've done that, you can see that now we have the body. Now that I have that defined, let's create a function called step, and this would essentially steps the ant through its movements and all. This would basically give the ant movement. So of course, this is just simply adding the speed to the position. And now that we have a step function, we also need to call the step function from the for each method. And once we have done that, we also need to call the request animation frame, which will essentially perform as our loop. And once you've done that, you can see that the ant definitely moves and the body follows behind it. Let's slow down the speed over here, so that we can actually see it on the screen. And let's also randomize the speed so that, so that it basically changes direction every now and then. And I'm just using the random between function to give it a random speed every now and then. And once I've done that, you can see that the ant's body definitely follows its head. It looks very much ant-like in behavior. So you can see many different, I mean, I'm just basically refreshing the screen over here to show its different movements, but you can see definitely that it's very ant-like. So Ravi, that was a logical point to stop, I would say.
Sure.
All right. I mean,
what is the next plan then?
The next plan or the next week is to extend this and to define the ant behaviors.
Behavior.
Yeah. So looking at the materials online, there can be, I mean, I think there can be 4 kinds of ants. There is a seeker ant, basically, or the same ant does 4 kinds of jobs. One, when it comes out of a nest, it starts looking for food. If an ant has found food, then it starts laying down pheromone trails, and we can give it another name. We can give it a name. And there can be ants that don't actually actively seek for food, but they are actually looking for pheromone trails. Those are the 3rd kind of ants, or the 3rd duty that they can do. And next week we'll define all of this.
Sure.
And I think that itself will constitute a majority of the work as far as an ant system is concerned.
Right.
And then of course there are things like the nest should be able to have more ants, or should be able to create more ants, and things like that. So far as what I've explained, I think this would be 3 parts. So the week after that, so the week after the next, we should be able to complete this. Super. All right.
Yep.
So yes. So if you subscribe to us, because you will be able to see this getting complete. I mean, if you're interested in seeing things like this being complete, you can of course subscribe to us. Yes, I like your T-shirt, buddy.
See you.
Nice.
See you guys. Ciao.
Ciao.